I'm going to start the slideshow and we'll get right into the good news. So, share. All right, so today we're talking about primarily about the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act. And that's what was passed and signed by the president a week ago Friday. So please ask your questions in the chat box. Barry's going to be monitoring that. And actually you can stop at different times in the presentation today because I think we have enough time to ask questions as we go. So, so Barry, just let me know when there's questions and we'll go from there. And a reminder that this is general information and it's subject to change. In fact, since I did this presentation for our local Chamber of Commerce on Tuesday, and there's even a few changes that happened. I think they happened that day, which I incorporated into the into this program. So this presentation is just slightly different than what I gave even a few days ago. So important point is there's still $120 billion out there under this program, and it closes June 30th. So if you know of any small businesses, entrepreneurs that haven't applied for it that would be eligible, please encourage them to get out there and get that money and bring it to our businesses. Local banks are accepting applications from new customers. And something interesting to note, the original CARES Act was 800 pages long. The flexibility program, it was only 14 pages. So loan terms, the couple of changes here are that the repayment terms now for any amount not forgiven is 5 years instead of 2. Still 1% interest. The other items, bullet points here didn't change except for the last one. Loan payments now begin 10 months after the bank/SBA forgiveness. So it was 6 months after the 8-week qualifying period. Now it's 10 months after forgiveness, which is a big deal, and it means it gives you, if you do have to take on a loan, it gives you plenty of time to plan for it. Remember that whatever PPP money is used to pay for, you cannot deduct it, and is forgiven, you can't deduct that on your 2020 tax return. It could be that you might not know if it might not be forgiven until early 2021, depending on how slow all this is. So I think there's going to be more rules coming out about this. And in fact, there's certain congressional efforts to get this changed so that those expenses still can be deducted. But I guess the Secretary of the Treasury doesn't like that idea. But hopefully that will change and you will be able to deduct those expenses. As you'll see as we go over this, it really is the intent of Congress that all these loans get forgiven. It's going to be pretty easy to get forgiveness, and when you look at these rules, there's still a lot of things that need to be explained, but I do think that it is reasonable to assume that they're going to be approved on the basis of the small business. And one of the reasons they made that new law was only 14 pages is basically wherever it used to say 8 weeks, they've now inserted 24 weeks. So that 24-week period begins on the date that the funds were deposited on your account, and it is going to, it will actually begin on that date and go through for 24 weeks. So if the timing is such that you got approved at the tail end, it would end on December 31st. So it's going to be 24 weeks or December 31st. 60% of the loan must be spent on the payroll instead of 75%. On Tuesday, I said that, or was it Monday? Anyway, early this week, it appeared that it was going to be a cliff. If you didn't spend at least 60%, nothing would be forgiven. but that has been clarified. And just as it was before, whatever portion you spend on payroll will be forgiven. And it appears that you can choose your period, 8 weeks or 24 weeks. I'm not sure why somebody would want the shorter period, but if there may be an unusual circumstance where that might be more beneficial, so you can still use the 8 weeks. Excuse me. So payroll still includes gross pay, group health insurance, retirement contributions, and state unemployment insurance. FICA is not included in gross payroll, and the payroll that can be included for forgiveness is up to a $100,000 annualized rate of pay. So if someone is paid more than $100,000, only the portion that's $100,000 or less can be used for forgiveness. So there remain several reductions. The first reduction for an employee's pay that's reduced by more than 25% remains the same. The period of time is different, but the rule remains the same. That calculation is on the original SBA forgiveness form. It's a fairly long calculation. I haven't gone through it in these PowerPoints just for the sake of time. So just remember that this is for a pay rate reduction during the forgiveness period, not a cumulative pay reduction. It's been a common question in all of these presentations. Okay, the second possible reduction remains the FTE requirement. So basically you have to have the same number of average FTEs during the coverage period, the eligibility period, as you did during a period back in 2019 from February 15th through the end of June, or the first 2 months in 2020. You get to use whichever period is more favorable. So this calculation remains. The safe harbors have been increased. So we still have the safe harbors that if the borrower restores its FTEs before June 30th, then the FTE reduction doesn't apply. And in the FTEs, you can also add back for basically voluntary resignations, or people requesting a voluntary reduction in hours, or people who are fired for cause, or the written offer in good faith to rehire an employee which the employee refuses. Those things basically remain the same, but they're not quite as important anymore. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. There are new FTE safe harbors that really help, especially employers in New York State. So if a business is unable to return to the same level of business activity that it was operating at before February 15th, due to compliance with HHS, CDC, or OSHA rules, then it's a safe harbor and the FTE reduction does not apply. So the purpose of this rule is to help businesses that can't return to full operation because of the pandemic. So a restaurant that can only be at 50% occupancy, for example, is granted the safe harbor for the FTEs. And also for businesses that are unable to rehire employees for unfilled positions. So whether they can't, or there are limitations on their business operations. So basically these two rules are saying if you cannot get back to full operations because of restrictions that have been placed on your business, you have a safe harbor. And so if businesses stay with the 8-week forgiveness period, the safe harbor is June 30th. For businesses that choose the 24 weeks, the safe harbor is December 31st. Okay, so here's the FTE rule probably isn't as critical anymore. Along with the additional safe harbors, because under the 24-week of payroll eligibility, almost all businesses will spend more on payroll than the PPP funds they received, and probably significantly more. So if you take the amount that a business would pay during those 24 weeks and you apply any FTE reduction that might be appropriate, it would probably, the reduced amount is still probably going to be more than the PPP funds. That's the way, in a broad interpretation of the Flexibility Act. Now, the devil is always in the details, and it could be that the SBA in the forgiveness forum will say, no, you can't use the total payroll during the 24-week period. You can only use the amount of the PPP funds. I mean, that could happen. But that's not the intent of Congress in this. They basically want these loans forgiven. So it's going to be, it's really going to take paying attention to the rules that come out from the SBA in the next few weeks and from the Department of Treasury. It's, you know, it's a tough one to call. And the experts I've listened to this week really don't know which way it will go. Oh, the other thing I was going to bring up is that there's actually some talk from some congressional leaders that there would be an automatic forgiveness of any PPP loan under $150,000, because they're thinking about the amount of paperwork that the banks and the SBA are going to have to handle under this for forgiveness, and just the sheer volume of work for it, what is to congressional level a fairly small amount of money.
Nancy, you have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So Joe Priest is asking, if you surpass your PPP loan easily before 24 weeks, do you have to wait for the 24 weeks to apply for forgiveness, or can you apply early?
Apparently, from what they're saying, you don't have to wait. You can apply when you any time in that period when you want to apply for forgiveness. So I would stay tuned, but the reading that we're getting is that you can apply anytime once you spend the money.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So here's another rule that probably isn't as big a deal anymore. Last week, I think I spent quite a bit of time on this because it was significant. Now, not so much. And that is payroll funds are eligible for forgiveness if they are paid or incurred during the 24-week period. And there's actually an alternate payroll period you can use, which means that you could start your eligible payroll costs on the pay date, on the pay period that begins after the date that you receive the money. So that gave businesses, could give businesses up to another week or so of eligible payroll costs. Very critical when it was 8 weeks. Now, not so important when it's 24 weeks. Switching to non-payroll items, no change here, except it can be up to 40% of the forgiveness. And go on to the next one. And this is for paid during the covered period or incurred. So this is like the payroll rule in a way. This was very important when it was only 8 weeks. Now that it's 24, not so important. And the example is still based on the 8 weeks, which shows that a business paid during their covered period, the business paid their May and June electricity bills, so they were eligible for forgiveness. And then they had a covered period which ended on July 26th. So their electric bill that they paid on August 10th included charges for a period of ending through July 26th, and they could prorate that bill and include it in their costs for forgiveness.
Nancy,
Mm-hmm.
there's one additional question. Ian is asking, how would automatic forgiveness work with the reduction in forgiveness amount associated with also receiving an EIDL? Has the guidance around this changed?
No, it hasn't. So, and the tough thing is you still have to deduct your EIDL from your PPP forgiveness. So no change on that at this point. So as we look at the non-payroll costs, one of the points to make is this may not even be a factor in the forgiveness calculation, as the amount of payroll costs now eligible for the PPP is going to be higher because of the 24 weeks. And if you have a choice as to whether to put payroll in or non-payroll costs, it's better to use your payroll costs because they're easier to document, makes the whole forgiveness application process that much less work. And this was a discussion last time, the whole paid or incurred question of what, so you pay expenses during the eligibility period, you incur expenses during the eligible period, what do you get to count? Well, the good thing is as soon as your period started, whatever you paid counted. And at the end of the period, if you had amounts that you'd incurred but not yet paid, you could basically accrue those on a prorated basis and add them to your eligibility period. But once again, this is not such a big deal now with 24 weeks because it gives you a lot more time to spend the PPP funds. Remember, the PPP funds were calculated based on 2.5 months payroll. So then when it came time to spending them, and you had 8 weeks, it was hard to get all of that money spent under the requirements, especially because businesses were shut down or beginning to reopen and couldn't make the total requirements. Well, now with 24 weeks, you've got two and a half months of payroll at the beginning of the process, and now you've got almost 6 months to spend it for forgiveness. So the timing is much more favorable to the small business. And the question that was just asked is the SBA will deduct any EIDL loan advance from the PPP forgiveness amount. We were talking about this earlier today. It's kind of ironic because it actually is penalizing people who got an EIDL, because theoretically you could end, let's say you got a $1,000 advance under the EIDL funds and that gets deducted from your PPP forgiveness. Are they going to set you up with a loan and everything else is forgiven? You're going to end up with a loan for $1,000. I think there's going to be some further legislation on that. All right, spreadsheet time. Let me get to that. Okay, Barry, do you see the spreadsheet now? Or do I need to stop? Okay, great. Good. All right, so this is the old spreadsheet. And this shows an 8-week period for a business that got $49,851 of PPP funds on April 16th. So their 75% requirement was $37,000, and they had 8 weeks to spend the money by. So this is someone who got the money early in the process. You know, got in because we all thought that the money was going to run out. Well, it did in the first round, and but got the money when he was about half of regular staffing. So his gross pay weekly basis at that point was $2,300, and he had 3 FTEs over in this green column. So assuming that he got back to full staffing about May 15th, and this is planning, we did this for planning to help this entrepreneur. These numbers have been changed to protect the innocent, but it was used to help somebody figure out when they could bring people back. And he'd be back to 8 FTEs at that point in mid-May. then his gross pay that would be eligible for forgiveness at that point was only $28,000. So he had only spent 57% of his PPP funds, not hitting the 75% requirement. And so it's 5.8 FTEs. We have to look at the reference periods. We've got the two reference periods over here. First one in light green is average FTEs during that period of 7. The 2 months that you could use as a reference period for 2019, his average is 7.2. So he had to reduce his forgivable amount. He could only get 83% of it. So that brought that down to 23,000. So where is he now under the new rules? Well, now we've got 24 weeks of payroll. He now spends 104,000 on payroll. You know, he is basically at 100% of his FTEs, and the potential forgiveness, I mean, it's much, much more. It's not really 104,000. Basically the potential forgiveness should be, if I do this right, should be the 49,000. So these worksheets are a work in progress. We look at the old 25% rules. This business had 5,000 in rent, 1,000 utilities, so it's 6,000. His 25% requirement up here was 12,462, so he didn't even meet that. Now under the 40% rules, which it doesn't even matter because he's hit it with payroll, but over the 24 weeks, his rent will be 12,500, his utilities 3, so he has 15,000 eligible for forgiveness. So I had a tab on here before to show under the original rules, this business would have to repay $20,000 because he didn't hit the requirements. And under the old loan payments, which would still be a good deal, a 1% interest over 2 years, he would have to repay $857 a month. So under the new rules, they still have the 49,000, eligible payroll is 104, eligible other forgiveness is 15, so doesn't have to repay anything. So the question I brought up about the FTEs previously is if the FTEs had gone down back here on the 60%, let's say he hadn't hit, and I'm sorry, I have average FTEs during the 8 weeks, is 24 weeks. I hadn't updated the spreadsheet there. But if he did have a reduction in FTEs here, would that reduction over here apply to the 49,000 or the 104? That's the big question. Hopefully it'll apply to the 104, but we don't know that yet. So stay tuned for that answer. You know, so much of this it really is a work in process, not just these spreadsheets, but working together to figure out what they mean. Like I said, I'm in weekly seminars on this, and the presenters are saying pretty much the same thing.
Nancy?
Yeah?
So Ree has another question on EIDL. She said, I thought the $1,000 EIDL was a grant and any additional sum would be a loan. Am I wrong on this?
The EIDL advance is a grant. Anything over the advance is a loan. Okay. So it's up to the $10,000 that is a grant. However, if they're deducting it from your PPP forgiveness, then it ends up being a PPP loan.
Right.
So
she follows up with when was it decided that the EIDL will be forgiven? The terms I signed this week didn't mention this. I think she may be getting confused between PPP and EIDL.
No, maybe you should see if you'd like to ask the question. So there's the EIDL loan, which is definitely a loan. And if she has signed loan documents this week, then we're talking about the loan portion. Then there's the advance part that was up to the original 10,000. So you want to check and see if that answers her question.
Sure will.
Okay. So yeah, just we'll see. And then, so more good news. There was, in the early sessions we did, I went over the tax benefits as part of the CARES Act, and then we dropped them off because most of them you couldn't get if you got a PPP loan. Well, in the Flexibility Act, they put back the deferral of payment of payroll tax, even if you get your PPP loan forgiven. So this is, I've been paying attention to tax law for a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. A business can defer the employer portion of their Social Security payroll tax obligations, 6.2%. You know, your FICA or Social Security total payment is 7.65, but a portion of that's Medicare, so you don't defer that. But the 6.2%, one half of that can be deferred until December 31st of 2021. That is a long time, and basically is a tax-free or an interest-free loan. The other half is payable a year after that. You take advantage of this on the quarterly payroll returns and 941s. The IRS has already adjusted it. The original thing is you couldn't do this if you had got PPP forgiveness, but you can do it now. So this is really good news. Now the forgiveness, sorry.
Before you move too far ahead, Ian has another question as far as documentation. What documentation would be needed to show for a reduction in FTEs due to an employee voluntarily leaving or reducing their hours?
Basically, you need something that is electronic or written, that hopefully they've given you a written notice, email is sufficient that they're leaving, or they ask for a reduction in hours and you documented that. So it's not a form, it is whatever documentation you have. Hopefully it's written, but even if it's not, if you've got a record of a phone call or a memo of a phone call, I think that would work. And all of this, remember that it's a little bit different than what we think of in dealing with the government, in that they want to be able to forgive these. So if there's a question and you can document it in however you can, and you can show that you're being reasonable and that the rest of your documentation is in place, I think it will be accepted. That's my opinion, but I have heard it espoused from leaders in the financial world too. So,
Nancy, one more question. I'm assuming SS is Social Security deferment available to self-employment?
I think so. I'm going to check. When I was reading it in the original CARES Act, I think it was. We'll have to check for sure. It wouldn't be the full 15.3% that self-employed people pay, but it would be a portion of what would be equivalent to the employer's share. So I'll have to check on that for sure.
One more question. Can you use PPP for 1099 and receive forgiveness?
No, that one has not changed. So, all right. So the SBA form, the forgiveness form that we spent so much time talking about in the last few weeks, is now obsolete. A new form will be issued, but I will take a few minutes to go through the old form requirements because I think some of these things will survive. And the first one is there'll be a table where all employees have to be listed, including name, identifier, cash. Average FTE is calculated by employee. And this is where if there were any salary or hourly wage reductions of more than 25%, you would have to include the calculation here. If there were none, you enter 0, and you'd want to make sure that you have records to show what an employee earned as of the, I can't remember the date, but basically pre-COVID and what they earned during the eligibility period. And you have to include payroll registers, quarterly payroll reporting forms, and account statements for employee health and retirement, and your FTE calculation documentation. That calculating that's going to take is going to be one of the most time-consuming things. But I think what will help is if you use a third-party payroll service, a lot of those calculations can be done, like the ADPs and Paychecks of the world. Non-payroll expenses, the documentation there is pretty deep. You have to have, for interest, you have to have lender amortization schedules and account statements or canceled checks. I mean, a lot of the times we don't have canceled checks anymore, so it'll be account statements. For rent, you actually have to copy of the lease agreement. And for utilities, you have to have invoices and account statements or canceled checks. I mean, the whole thing about canceled checks is kind of old school, but basically you have to prove that you paid it. This is what the Schedule A looked like. And the idea here is that you can see that you have to include each employee, the cash, the average FTE by employee, and any salary or wage reduction. And that's PPP updated for the Flexibility Act. Questions? Do you have any more questions, Barry?
Unmute.
I did not see any additional questions.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thanks for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Barry now to talk about reopening. Oh, I got to stop share. Excuse me, I got to wake up.
Can you all see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Give me just a moment. Okay. All right. So phase 3 reopening. I had in here likely going to be at the end of the week, but it is going to be tomorrow. As far as we know right now, who can open? It is restaurants, and it's indoor seating specifically, and everybody is opening at 50% capacity at this point. The typical rules right now are people are supposed to have masks on until they get seated, and it has to be seated table type service and 6 feet, minimum of 6 feet apart for table service as well. Servers will have masks on. So that's kind of the guidance I've seen thus far. Personal care professionals. So what is included in that is tattoos, tattoo parlors, piercing facilities, appearance enhancement practitioners, massage therapy, spas, cosmetology, nail specialties, UV and non-UV tanning, and waxing facilities. So those are all that are included. There are some pieces that were listed, and I don't know if anybody has the answers to this yet, but there were some pieces included last time for phase 2 that did not open, and I haven't seen any guidance on that as far as phase 3. has anybody seen any guidance as far as like malls, any of those types of things? I know there's like the parks and that are open, but like the swimming type parks, I don't know that they have been given any guidance as far as opening as of yet. So if anybody has any additional information that's coming out, because I know this information is kind of free flowing and on an hourly, daily type basis. So if you've heard anything, please post it in the chat. All right. So the regional guidelines for reopening. So basically what we've been discussing as reopenings have been happening is developing your reopening list based on key factors. So the key factors would be having a plan, having everything that you're doing documented, update existing policies for the COVID-19, and then make sure that everything that has been updated or things that you are presenting new to both staff, customers, vendors, your facility, those things are being communicated. So any policy changes or updates. Some of the big pieces with social etiquette is posting the hand washing signs, the sneezing type posters, the posters regarding if you have any type of illness, if you're feeling sick, staying home, all of those would fall into that social etiquette practice. And then again, cleaning and sanitizing is really high on the list as far as what you should be doing as part of your plan. So some key learnings as we developed our plan, the PPE that was required both for staff and customers, you had to have a stockpile of that and you had to show where you were getting it. And that was a key piece is as far as being able to maintain that inventory. And I think that's something that everybody needs to look at moving forward if they haven't done so already. Health screening, so there were two procedures that the state was recommending for that. One was the thermometers and having a check station as people were coming into your facilities. The other was a daily questionnaire, so having people answer 3 questions as far as their health, if they have COVID-8 or COVID-19, if they feel like they have any symptoms, or if they've been associated with anybody that has it. Need to develop a cleaning, sanitizing strategy. So they're looking for you to be updating your cleaning. The other piece of that is they're also looking for you to be marking down, knowing who is cleaning your facility, how often they're cleaning your facility, and what types of chemicals they're using to clean with. The summary guidelines the state provides for your industry group. So that's another area that you're going to want to be looking at is what specific guidelines you need to follow. So they have mandatory and then they have recommended guidelines. So looking at both of those and making sure that you at least have the mandatory guidelines set in place. And again, the reduced building populations that you're seeing is based on your C of O. So knowing what your certificate of occupancy is very important. All right. So finalizing your reopening plan. So you have to affirm that you've read the guidelines and created a plan. So basically, you have to hit these 4 items to ensure that you're complete and that you're open. So the governor gives the green light for your industry to be open. You've reviewed your industry specific guidelines. You've created and communicated your industry specific plan, and you have completed your online affirmation. So all of those pieces are going to be on the governor's website to be able to look at your guidelines, develop your plan, and then to affirm your specific plan for your facility. If one of the 4 criteria are not met, So there are some things that can happen. So they are giving fines. So there's a retail maximum of 10,000 and a manufacturer maximum of 100,000 if you decide to open your business prior to being allowed from any of those 4 items. Other things as far as operations that have licenses. So there are licenses that could be suspended, canceled, or revoked. And just as an FYI, there is a hotline also that allows both patrons and staff to be able to report establishments that are not following guidelines. And that's kind of it for me. If anybody does have any more guidance, or if anybody has seen anything as far as area specific guidance around additional items that may have been included that are just coming out, that would be great to see. Any questions? If you do have any, you can post them in the chat and I'll get right back to you. All right, that's it from me. Thank you.
All right, and then Nancy, could you make me the admin, and then I will share our programming that is coming up on Tuesday, June 16th.
Okay, let me get to the right place here again. Remind me where I changed that, please.
I think,
If you just click on her picture.
Okay, that's right. Sometimes.
all right, I think I can do it. Yep, there we go. All right, everyone.
Okay.
So IncubatorWorks is going to be starting this program next week. It is a 5-week program. So it's once a week for an hour and a half each week. And this is really for current businesses, although we do have a few applicants that are a little newer within the community. So it's Road to Recovery. So it's basically, what do you do in the new business community and the community that you serve as far as moving forward, and your customer base versus who your customers used to be, to if that customer base may have changed. So we have the curriculum listed here. Our first week is going to be on Tuesday, June 16th at 3:30, and we will be discussing assessing the situation. So IncubatorWorks will be facilitating this cohort, and then week 2 will be understanding your changing customer. Week 3 will be reimagining your business. Week 4 is marketing in the new business landscape, and week 5 is cash flow. And as I'm reading this, I realize we have changed things up a bit. So week 2 is going to be cash flow, because cash flow is king and it's very important. So we'll be diving into that the second week, which is June 23rd. So if any of you are interested in this program, feel free to reach out to myself or Nancy or Barry. My email is here on the flyer. Include your name, a short description of your business, and the location in which your business resides.
All right. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
So that concludes our program for today. Are there any final questions? We plan to do this again next week, and hopefully we'll have some answers to all the questions that the new Flexibility Act created. So we'll see what the next week brings. And we're going to have the excitement of actually getting back to closer to being back in full business. So, so thank you for joining us. And just as a last push, if you know anybody who small business or startup that needs help with figuring out how to go back to, or how to pivot their business, please send them our way. And thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing many of you next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Great job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.